latest episode of the Rob Harkavy interviews exclusively on Out News Global. Now, my next guest served in the coalition government as a Minister of State in the Home Office and in the Ministry of Justice. He entered into a civil partnership with his then partner of 10 years back in 2009, and he's recently donned the ermine and been elevated to the House of Lords. He's just been appointed as the United Kingdom's Special Global LGBT Envoy, and he's also hosting a global LGBT conference in London next year when the current unpleasantness, hopefully, is all behind us. So let us give a massive Out News Global welcome to Lord Herbert. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Rob. Thank you very much indeed for meeting me.
Yeah, it's a joy. It really is. Now, before we talk about your specific role, you don't need me to tell you that you are a Conservative and you've served in a Conservative-led government. And there is a kind of elephant in the room with the LGBT community, and I think a kind of residual distrust that goes back maybe to Section 28 or even to the 50s when the Wolfenden Report wasn't acted upon, and it took a Labour government to do it 10 years later. So my question is, I know you're not here to electioneer, but to speak to the LGBTQ viewers of this interview, has the Conservative Party actually changed, or is it something more cynical where not liking gay people is no longer a vote winner?
Oh no, the Conservative Party has changed massively. I mean, in 2005, I was the first out gay man to be elected to a Conservative seat. But now there are dozens of Conservative MPs who are gay, and there are gay and bi members of Parliament in all the parties. And the Conservative Party, began what I think was a really important process of change, particularly under David Cameron. He apologized for Section 28. Mm-hmm. We supported the legislation on incitement to gay hatred. I led for our party on that. And then, of course, crucially, David Cameron introduced equal marriage. And he took a very courageous stance in doing that. But he was determined to see it through. And subsequently, the Conservative governments under successive prime ministers have continued to introduce measures to progress equality. So I think that the great thing about these issues is the way in which they've become depoliticized, and there is such a strong cross-party agreement on them. Now, that not on every matter and every detail, but in the main, I think there is cross-party agreement. And in fact, we have a cross-party committee in Parliament, the all-party group on global LGBT rights that I set up and chaired, and that has politicians in both the Commons and the Lords of all parties working together. And I think when we work together, we can be stronger. So I think this, I appreciate that, there are some who may have memories going back to Section 28, but I believe our society and our politics, and I believe the Conservative Party really has changed.
Yeah, and you talk about successive Conservative governments, and I promise you we'll get onto the Special Envoy bit in a minute, but I know this is important. And in one of those successive governments, Mrs. May, Theresa May, promised an end to conversion therapy. Now, okay, we'll live with a delay because of the pandemic, and there's loads of legislation that obviously wasn't able to get through in the past year. It's finally gone into the Queen's speech, but with yet another consultation. I mean, what's left to consult in your view?
Oh, actually, I do think the consultation is important because there are, we need to look at the detail, some of the international evidence of where conversion therapy bans have already gone through, and the legal implications. So I'm not bothered about the consultation at all. I think it's actually an opportunity to get the legislation right. What I think matters is that this was in the Queen's speech. The government has been absolutely clear that we will ban conversion therapy.
And that will be in this Parliament. It will be in this Parliament.
we will ban conversion therapy. So there is absolutely no intention in the consultation to delay. That's not what it's about at all. And one of the things I'm going to be working on is helping to ensure that we get these proposals right, that they're comprehensive, and that the ban is effective. And I'm already talking to the campaigners about this, and I know that this is something that the Prime Minister is determined that we do.
Well, now, he is obviously committed to global LGBT rights. Otherwise, he wouldn't have appointed you. Now, it's a great title, Global Envoy. What exactly will you be doing? What will your job entail?
I'm very proud to have been invited by him. It's a great honor to be the Prime Minister's envoy. And I should just say that this is the first time this role has been created in the UK. And I will be one of the very few envoys around the world. We expect that the United States will appoint an envoy. President Obama did have one, then the position fell. I believe that I will have a counterpart shortly in the United States. And in the past, Canada had one. So for a major country like the United Kingdom to have an envoy, to be the Prime Minister's special envoy on these issues, that in itself is sending a very strong signal, both domestically and globally, of the importance that the Prime Minister himself attaches to these issues. And I just don't want to underestimate that. I think it's a big deal. Yeah. I intend to make the most of this role to promote LGBT rights. And also just to say that I know that the Prime Minister is personally committed to these issues. You know, I walked side by side with Boris on the London Pride March. I talked to him about these issues and know he's committed. I persuaded him to hold the global LGBT conference that the UK will now be holding next year. We had to delay it because of COVID, obviously. Yeah. But we're doing it next June. And it was very much Boris that wanted to hold that conference. I'll come back to that in a second. And when he became Foreign Secretary, just as one as an indication, you know, he restored the policy that the rainbow flag would fly above government buildings, for instance, to celebrate Pride, or as we did on Monday, on Ida Hobbit Day, on our missions around the world. And that symbolism is very important. And it was Boris who said, no, I want that to happen. So I know that the Prime Minister is committed to these issues. He sees it as very important. It's part of the ambition that Britain should project our values around the world. He also sees it as directly linked to being a modern economy in which everybody has the opportunity to succeed, and in which diversity is a huge asset and an economic asset. So so part of my role is to chair this conference. This will be the biggest event of its kind ever held in the world, because it will bring together not just activists, which is great, from all around the world, and experts, but also politicians, ministers from around the world, and for the first time, parliamentarians from around the world, through the Global Equality Caucus, which I set up 2 years ago at the United Nations, brings parliamentarians together. And we will have diverse members of parliament, including trans members of parliament from around the world, are going to come to this conference. So it's going to be a really significant event. And that is going to focus on kind of 3 key areas. I mean, one is trying to achieve further decriminalization around the world. There are still some 70 countries that criminalize gay people. 11 of them still have the death penalty. Some of these laws, an inheritance, I'm afraid, from the days, the colonial inheritance from the UK. So we have a kind of responsibility here. And particularly through the Commonwealth, we need to try and work with those countries to achieve decriminalization. Then there's the ambition to end violence and discrimination. There are too many countries around the world where people are still living in fear. where we have discriminatory laws, and worse, where there is actually violence against LGBT people, and we need to tackle that. And then we need to ensure and try and promote equal access to public services, and particularly when you think of things like HIV and the importance of ensuring equality of access. And this has actually gone backwards in some countries, not forwards, and COVID has not helped. And so the idea is that we will be working with our allies and trying to encourage other countries to join in an agreed program of action to achieve all of these things. Patiently working country by country, sometimes overtly, sometimes more behind the scenes if it's necessary to do that, supporting activists on the ground and encouraging politicians to use their leadership role and to act. And my job as envoy will be not just to chair the conference and to make that event happen, but to actually drive the plan that will make sure all of this is carried forward. So there's a role on the international stage, and then there's also a role domestically to drive a program of action over the next year in the run up to the conference, starting with the ban on conversion therapy, but also to look at the other areas where I think we should pay more attention about how we can promote equality for LGBT people. Because conversion therapy is really important, but there are other issues as well that I think we need to return to.
Sure. You mentioned the Commonwealth, where, and you rightly referred to the old 19th century penal codes, which we kind of still have responsibility for the legacy. There remain British overseas territories, which also have anti-gay laws. Now, we do not use our colonial power on these territories, but we are entitled to. Can you see a time where Westminster might impose LGBT equality laws on British overseas territories, or at least set some sort of ultimatum that if you want the protection of the British government, you've got to enact some equality laws?
So there's an ongoing debate about this, and I certainly think that we should use our influence at the very least to drive the right measures here. In the end, you're right. The UK might be able to claim reserve powers, but we also have to respect the fact that these are their own countries with their own elected parliaments, and it's not a small thing. It's not a small thing for the UK Parliament to override. I mean, imagine if we tried to do that within the UK. I do think that we must continue to exert the pressure wherever we can in the right way diplomatically to achieve the outcomes that we want. And we obviously do have more leverage in relation to the overseas territories and so on. And we should use that appropriately where we can. But my job as envoy is to try and make the case, is to go and talk to people, to reach out, whether it is to the LGBT groups, whether it is to parliamentary colleagues of all parties, whether it's to other countries' ministers and their politicians. I believe in dialogue and persuasion, and I think the UK has a proud record in this area, but it's one we've built up patiently and over time. It didn't all happen in a big bang, and we have to respect that in other countries.
Sure.
But I believe that Britain can be a force for good, and I believe we can be a force for good in relation to LGBT rights, because LGBT rights are human rights and they should be universal. And I'm determined to use this role to promote that message wherever I can take it.
Well, I cannot think of a more uplifting sentiment to wind this up. So Nick, Lord Herbert, we wish you all the best in your new role. We wish you love, luck and happiness. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.